Well, education's a big reason why Norwich is where it is today. It's been a major part of Norwich's progress and growth over the last many, many years. There are so many families that moved to this town specifically because of the schools. And I would say that what's important in Norwich's schools today was important in Norwich's schools, way back when so many students were attending these one-room schoolhouses. And I would say that the seeds to Norwich's education system were planted in these schoolhouses.
I always thought that on the whole, the rural schools in Norwich were very good.
Well, first we moved up to Corinth, and then we moved to Pompanusic. That's where I went to school.
I went to the Pompanusic School in the village of Pompanusic. I started in the fall of 1939 in the first grade.
I attended the Root District School because it was the closest one.
Then my father was transferred to Germany, and so my mother and I came up here and we lived with her folks, Allison and Sprague Slack on the Turnpike Road, the second house north of the old schoolhouse, which was at the intersection of Needham and Turnpike Road.
I was on the Turnpike Road, Turnpike School, 8 years.
I don't know, it just seemed a happy place to be because we were all sort of enmeshed in the great Turnpike School.
I remember as we went in the front door, which was sort of just a big door, and we went up the steps and in through the door, and then we had a place to hang our jackets and things along the wall in the back. And then it was just a big room, and way down in the left-hand corner was the big furnace.
My Muncaster lived across the road from there, and he'd come over in the morning and build a fire before the school started, so the building would be warmed up when we got there.
Charlie Hodgson used to come with the horses and sleigh, a sled wagon or sleigh with cordwood on it to fill up the wood, to fill up a woodshed there. God, it must have been green stuff. I think they just cut the thing, and I pitied the poor teacher to try to get that thing going in the morning, but she did. She was able to make it. There must have been some dry wood somewhere there, but it was kind of exciting to see them back around the building with the horses. So.
You get in there in the morning, even though they got the fire going, and quite often school was delayed because you were all huddled up around the stove. That was only occasionally, not every day by any means, but it wasn't unusual to wear your coat.
The boys took turns to put our flag outside, and we saluted our flag and said the Lord's Prayer before we started the school day.
You know, you had to put your hand up if you wanted to go to the bathroom or whatever, you go get a drink of water and wait your turn.
So many of them had chores to do when they got home and work on the, they lived on farms in the rural area and they had work to do at night, so they didn't, they didn't have time on their hands to do homework.
The first schoolhouse I went to burned down. And I believe it burned down when I was in the 3rd grade. While we had no school, there was a gentleman that had a big farm right at the bottom of the hill where we were down. He opened up his 2 front rooms and his house. He had a big house. But the school was split between the 2 with 1 teacher. That was kind of tough. But that's where we were until the 2nd schoolhouse was built. And I think I went back when I was in the 5th grade.
Vermont is proud to be, I think, the first state to include public education in its constitution way back in 1777. And Norwich actually was one of the earliest towns to really enact that and create school districts as early as 1781, I think.
The district was the unit of organization. All these towns were divided into districts by the end of the Civil War. if a town was roughly 40 square miles, a district would average about 2 square miles. And they all were created for very practical, functional purposes. They allow people who lived in the community to be able to walk to school. The district school, or your one-room school, was the major community building for neighborhood at a time in an agricultural society when neighborhood relations were of central importance. If you had a barn raising, if you wanted to have a dance, you wanted to celebrate something, you had a wedding, it was the neighborhood, not the town.
Settlement patterns were pretty much spread out, more spread out than they are now, where they're more concentrated into villages. And each district was in charge of, hiring the teacher, paying for it, raising the money to build it, and then controlled all the finances and the standards for each school.
Well, the building was one room with a covered entrance with 2 doors, one on the left and right. If you went in that left-hand door, the teacher's desk was on the right, and the blackboards were between the 2 doors.
It had large windows, no insulation anywhere. One big wood stove with a round tin around it. Kerosene lamp hitched on brackets around the wall. And one school teacher that had to do everything.
Oh, it was kept up. It was one room with a adjacent bathroom. And I think there was a flush toilet in the bathroom. And then I guess also a woodshed attached to the school.
They had a basement, and the heating system, whatever it was, I never went down to see it, was on down there. And so that was out of the room.
And then the desks were facing as you went in, and then there was a little stage where there was a girls' bathroom and a boys' bathroom. Now, they weren't through flush toilets either. I don't know where it went. I guess they did have water.
It's all one unit. You had your desk, and then you had a swivel chair. Then there was a round thing on top that had a little inkwell in it. Then you had your lid to put your books and stuff inside.
A little slots where you hold your pencil.
I remember the children walking to school in all kinds of weather. Earl Reynolds froze his ears one very cold morning, so there was a job for the teacher to get them thawed out.
Some of the students had to walk probably 1.5 miles to get there. That's rain or shine, good weather or bad weather.
It was just about 1 mile, and I always walked. There was only 1 year that I ever had a ride, and that was in the winter.
Mud season, we used to close the school because the car couldn't get through to bring the kids in.
We walked to school, and some days where the weather was bad, in the wintertime my dad would hitch up a horse and sleigh, take us to school.
We used to ski to school. Sometimes we had a big toboggan-like thing, and we'd all pile on that. If you missed a turn, you ended up in the brook.
Women basically were easier to maintain a discipline according to what was conceived as their conception of moral standards. There was dress codes. There were women, teachers were not allowed to date, basically, no hanging out in the bars. Each district had its own school committee, and they were in charge. And they were elected at town meeting. And they're the ones that hired and fired.
I mean, it was really the luck of the draw and whether you had a a capable teacher. One of the other movements in Vermont for upgrading the schools is the teacher education and the rise of the normal school, which is a teacher's college, basically.
The first one I taught in was in New Boston, and that was in 1931 to 1930. No, wait a minute, 1930 to 1931, and then I came to Root District in 1931 and stayed till 1942. I think my salary at New Boston in 1930 was $18 a week.
First day at school, she had her name on the blackboard, and she introduced herself as Emma MacDonald, the red-headed Irish girl. And now we will all join in and sing Old MacDonald's Farm just to get it passed, and then we'll go to work, or words to that effect. She was you did your work, but she was a very jolly person. She just was a good teacher.
Florence Somerville was the school teacher. Wonderful person, respected by the students, beloved by everybody. And even after, in later years, she was an active member of the community and highly regarded by everybody at the time.
We had Miss Sears, Miss Stella Sears. That's who I started out with. She taught there a number of years before I went to school there, but then in, I think, the 4th grade, we had Miss Ellen Porter.
Yeah, old Stella was the worst one.
Oh, yeah.
Throw you right out in the middle of the room.
She was shake the hell out of you and then she'd let you go. You know? Fall on the
Why? Mrs. Potter was far behind her.
Well, just told them that got to do different and straighten them out. We didn't have any rash punishments at all.
She didn't take a lot of foolishness. That's back when you could strike people. Like, she'd have us put our hands right on the desk, and she has that ruler. Well, you didn't need too many claps before you realized you must have done something wrong.
We had a dunce stool, and we had to go down. I'd never had to sit on that stool, thank goodness. And she had this hat, the dunce hat. She'd put it on, sit on the top, and you had to sit there. They wouldn't let you do that nowadays.
When I put the girl's pigtail in the inkwell, it wasn't a good thing.
My school was 9 o'clock, and we stayed there until 4.
School used to keep until 4 o'clock in order for children who walked a long distance to get home before dark.
At the time I taught, we had a course of study from state of Vermont that we followed each grade. And we tried to complete all they asked us to do, every grade.
In order to hear all the classes, grades were combined especially in geography, history, and science. A combination of grades 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and 7 and 8 gave me only 3 classes in those areas. We placed special emphasis on reading and arithmetic.
We used to get the children, get the older ones all busy doing on whatever project they were on, and work down and work with the first graders and second graders. And then while they were doing their seat work, as we called it, go back and help the others.
When we had our work done, then we would just go and help the younger kids read or help them doing whatever they were doing.
Very often they were working on something much more interesting than what you were doing, so you kind of listen.
Of course, they probably wouldn't do it now, but one week the congregational minister would come, the next week Episcopal minister would come.
And hygiene, which is health called today, it was one of the subjects we had. We had spelling bees too. See who'd stand up for longest.
I liked arithmetic I mean, now I couldn't do it because it's all algebra and everything else, I guess, but when you had reading, writing, arithmetic you had back then, but geography wasn't too bad.
Of course, there was no refrigerator there, and we drank milk. We always had milk, so we each had a little jar of milk, and there was a little brook that ran behind the school, and that's where we'd put our milk in the jars, so to keep it cool.
And then when they got around to have hot lunch, I had to do that too. So I had to leave the room, go to the little kitchen, and start the stove and get the hot lunch started about 10:30 or 11:15. It was a one-dish meal, usually. Sometimes it would be a soup or a casserole or baked beans.
We carried some lunch, but we had hot plates, and they used to get like government surplus foods too, you know, I remember, and they would usually cook something for lunch there, so.
But all my family, we had to go home for lunch. We never packed a bag.
We had a 15-minute recess in the morning, and then we had a whole hour at noon, 12 to 1. But we had a lot of things to do, you know. We had to have that hot lunch taken care of. And
Outside was the usual set of swings and teeterboard.
We had built a big igloo outside. We made bricks. We had a big igloo, and we used to play hide and seek.
The older boys, they were always up to something, and I guess I tried to keep abreast of what they were doing, but didn't really fit in.
We drew names for Christmas, swapped names. And the ones you got, you had to buy them a little gift.
Usually some of the older kids, one year I was one of them, went out and got the Christmas tree somewheres around on local land. And they'd set up and decorate a tree and have a little Christmas pageant. Wallace Waterman was generally Santa Claus. You want your typical. Wallace was well over 6 feet, and he didn't have a lot of extra meat on him anywheres. So he was a rather slender Santa Claus, but
at Valentine's, we had to send a valentine to everybody in the school so that everybody got a valentine.
So we all picked a bouquet of lilacs and we walked about, well, it was less than a half a mile down the road to the bridge that goes over the river. And we all dropped in the flowers. So it was, you know, for the soldiers that had died.
It had a big chunk stove in the end. I can remember, you know, as kids got older, that's one of our duties was to lug wood to it. Dropping one on my toe one time and losing a toenail out of the deal.
to take care of the schoolroom, practically almost all the janitor work.
We always used to have to clap the races, I guess was one of the biggest things at night. That was a lot of fun.
One of the things I did one year, I kind of did janitor work and swept up after school. And remember, I saved my money up so I could buy a bicycle.
They did most of their work at school. Of course, they had things to hunt up, find, and bring in, and so forth, but we didn't have the homework the way they do it today.
most everything you were able to get done in school, or at least I was. And sometimes you had some reading that you might have to do. But you got to think that a lot of us still had chores that we had to do. I lived on a farm. I had my chores long before I was really old enough to be doing them. And as I was driving a team of horses by the time I was 6 years old.
In Vermont, the big process of weakening these district schools began in really the 1880s, where the state began to establish general superintendencies and evaluating. I mean, it was a gradual process and requiring teachers to have certain qualifications.
State Board of Education, in conjunction with the Health Department, started instituting health standards, sanitary and health standards for schools overall, and especially for these rural schools. And the test included not only things that had to do with how many seats there are, if there's a bathroom, if there's running water, how much light there is, but also factors on the books, on the level of how the kids were doing, even on how much they paid the teachers and how well they were supported in the community. They were encouraging the construction of multi-classroom buildings for villages, village centers. And once the district system was abolished and the town was the one district, most of them did build a bigger village school that had graded classrooms. And any child in the entire town could come to that school.
When we went to Norwich when I was in the 4th grade, it was like, oh, this is too much for me. It just seemed I was really a different planet because we were all sort of enmeshed in the great Turnpike School.
Oh, I was petrified. I mean, going from a one-room school, even to go down there and take my exams, I mean, I'd look around Marion Cross School and I would think, oh my gosh, what's high school going to be like? Because we were never taken over there and go through, have orientation like they do now. And if I hadn't had my friend Marilyn at that time, I don't think I'd have made it.
There were at one time 18 schools in the town of Norwich, and by the time they were ended as schools in the late 40s, there were only 5 left. We can drive along back roads in Vermont and see lots of former one-room schoolhouses, but as soon as you go inside the door, or actually even from the road, many of them are homes and have been altered and expanded, or a lot of them lost to fire.
Well, after the school closed, they tried to keep it open. I remember they used to have card parties there and things like that. Trying to keep it going as a community building, but eventually the Hanover Fire Department burned it down.
To find ones that are still intact, really intact on the inside and out, is rare in the state, and to find 2 in one town was remarkable.
Since 1952, the Root District Game Club has been the caretaker of the Root Schoolhouse when the school district deeded the building over to this group of hunters who wanted a sort of a gathering place of their own. Starting in the 1970s, the building was, I think, for the first time called the Root District Community Center, and just sort of rebranded as an all-purpose community center. Even when the community was not using it, it was frequently, rented out to people for birthday parties, weddings. I've been aware of, like music classes happening there. In 2011, it was determined that the foundation had deteriorated so much that it was not safe to necessarily host large gatherings in there.
anybody in Beaver Meadow is by default sort of a member of the community and has access to the building. Its primary purpose is to provide the environment to continue the use and operation of the schoolhouse as a productive community resource. So many times people in today's society really don't interact with their neighbors in any meaningful way. This provides an opportunity for people to get together for a common cause. They share the locality, they share the immediate concerns that they have in the meadow, and they have a common goal in preserving the building and utilizing it. And when we have things like the Christmas parties and the Halloween parties, we tend to get pretty high attendance, and people bring their children, and we are now at the point where those little tykes that first showed up when we moved into the meadow are bringing their little tykes. And so there's a continuum that is, I think, hard to find these days.
Both these schools had been very much anchors in their communities while they had been schools in the 20th century, and as soon as they became no longer used as schools, they were immediately sort of embraced by their communities as community centers. The National Register for Historic Places is an honorary listing of historic buildings and sites throughout the country. And they are historic on many levels: national significance, state significance, and most of them are actually significant on the local level. And it's a very important piece of this collection of history that is recognized. So architecturally, they can still convey to the average person their history, what they were, why they were built.
The folks at the Game Club have been saying for more than 60 years that this building is a gem and that it's worth protecting. And now the Register gives us kind of independent recognition from some authority that knows that, yes, this building is a treasure. And it doesn't just let the people in this town know, but it lets people who care about historic preservation throughout the state and throughout the country know that here's this little building in Norwich, Vermont, and it deserves some protection.
And I'm sure that many outstanding people evolved from the system. Certainly looking back upon it, I think we can say that it must have been extremely difficult for one teacher to try to cover 6 grades at one time. And probably impossible to do as well as we can do today, where we have focus on one age group and a curriculum that's laid out and designed for that age group. But people went through the system, and they went on and went to college and did all kinds of things, and they made it work. And while it probably wasn't the best, at the time, considering the economics of transporting kids to a central school system, that probably was not practical at that time. And the one-room schoolhouses allowed much more local concentration of teacher and students, and there were probably some benefits from that. Generally, the teachers lived locally, they knew the families, they knew the children even before they went to school. And everybody knew each other. And I suspect there's a lot to be gained from that.
I think you appreciate and perhaps even learn more in that one-room school than you do in every class by itself, actually. I really do. It was, even though the atmosphere maybe is not the best, but I don't know. That's all we knew, so we thought it was great.
Let me put it this way. I think I got an education, but I'm not sure it was anything in comparison to what the children today get.
It's a change, I think, that had to come. I don't know that we're a lot better off for it. In some ways I think not, but it was sad in some ways to see them left to rot into the ground. It's too bad they couldn't have been used for something. Pompey was fortunate in the sense that it made someone a dwelling, you know, a place to live. And it's still there, and I can think about the good memories I had when I drive by it. And there was a lot of them. So it was an era that had to come to an end. I'm one that hated to see it, and sometimes I feel that we're not better off for it, but that's the way it is.
It's important to know what this building means to the people who actually attended school here, and to hear them reflect on their childhood, on their many years in this building with such fondness. I think that gives the building just a new level of depth.
It's really special that Norwich has these two buildings that are both in such remarkable state of preservation, and also just walking inside each one and standing outside, they convey not only their history but a warm sense of community, and that's a huge value.
But really, how it's used is not as important to me as the fact that it gets used. I think it's up to the building and the people of this community to decide the best use for it. But really, given the way it has served this community for so long and in so many different ways, I think it's earned the right to have a future.